Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We'll give a couple minutes just to let a few more people jump on, and I will be glad to introduce our panelists to you for this evening's live Zoom. My name is Sherry Straub, and I am the organizer for the Florida Community Rights and founder of the group Clean Water Now. We are here this evening to do a live panelist question and answer with the documentarian Alan Alderson and Kate. We have also Terry Lodge and Scott Wilson and Mike Knepper along with us. The People versus Agent Orange. Alan, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved making the film? And is there any personal connection that you have with Agent Orange?
The personal connection, I think, is really about caring for the terribly sad, deformed children who are being produced as a result of exposure to the toxicity in herbicides that were being sprayed in Vietnam years ago, between 1961 and 71, and then ridiculously were brought back for use in the United States in the timber industry and in Florida with aerial spraying over crops. In fact, it's going on all around the world. And I try to demand of myself that I do good. I saw the photographs of the saddest children probably on earth. Children in an Agent Orange orphanage in Vietnam. And I started thinking if it could be exposed that these suffering children were the result of profit motives on the part of the chemical companies, then perhaps it's a documentary that the world needs to see. That was about 10 years ago that I made that decision, and we're just now delighted that the film is finally out. It's playing on some 37 virtual cinema platforms. Sherry will probably tell you how to get to them. And it's being born and received with amazing impact. People are responding with outrage and grief, sorrow, shame, and a good bit of activist anger. And we can talk about all of that as this wonderful session goes on, but delighted to be here.
Thank you very much, Alan. I think that's kind of the feelings that I had after watching it was, at first I think it was shock because, I mean, just to see what they were actually doing, I just thought it was all in Vietnam War. Were there other chemicals used?
Going all the way back to World War I, chlorine gas was used by the Germans to tremendous destruction. For the United States, the use of Agent Orange, which has now been termed ecocide, meaning a broadly devastating attack on the landscape and its inhabitants, was the most intensive and extensive and longest lasting use of chemicals, and is said to have been the deadliest use of chemicals in the history of warfare. But mankind was ready to use weapons like that many decades before.
During your research, Alan, did between Vietnam and what you had seen here, what were the environmental impacts that you experienced or saw?
Oh, well, in Vietnam, they have these centuries old mangrove forests, incredible trees that spread their roots out, as you probably know, because they grow in Florida's mangroves as well. They provide a habitat for much water life, as I'm sure Scott and Terry can describe, Mike too, probably. Um, and those were wiped out. The mistaken idea on the part of the American military planners was that if they could poison the trees and eliminate the canopy that these old forests provided, they'd be able to see the enemy, the infiltrating Viet Cong, and be able to kill them. Not surprisingly, it was a terrible miscalculation. When they killed the trees, it enabled sunlight to reach the forest floor. And then bamboo and enormous grasses, what they now in Vietnam call American grass, grew up, and that gave much better cover to the so-called infiltrators than the forest canopy did. Nonetheless, they continued to spray and use it for a whole decade.
How did you become aware of the many different locations that were, being sprayed? And
Well, that's an interesting question, because nowhere was being sprayed in Vietnam when I went there. There were many, many victims, child victims, adult victims. It's been going on for 4 generations, and the herbicides attack the human genome and create, I would say, wreak havoc on the entire reproductive process. What I didn't know when I started working and went to Vietnam was that this was going on all over the United States as well, and that in Oregon, in Florida, throughout the agricultural lands of the United States, the aerial spraying of herbicides was continuing, and those herbicides were not properly tested. And there was a tremendous amount of corporate influence that was being brought to bear to allow these dangerous chemicals to be spread so broadly and to reach so many innocent victims. And it's only recently that it came to my attention that they're spraying over water. They're spraying on rivers, creeks, inland waterways, lakes, and that is contaminating not only the game fish and commercial fishing, but it's also contaminating water that people drink, and they're getting sick from it. As you see in the film, there was an absolute epidemic of what they call spontaneous abortions or miscarriages, which immediately followed the spring spraying season. So within a month of the spraying, women who were pregnant were losing their pregnancies right and left. And that's what began the activism that the film in part, narrates, the women in coastal Oregon began to get together to fight this, to protect themselves. And they were resisted at first by the National Forest Service, then by the Environmental Protection Agency, which EPA has come to be sometimes sarcastically known as the Environmental Pollution Agency. I think things will be a lot better now with the new administration. But there's a tremendous amount of housekeeping or house cleaning to go on before our society can truly arrive at a point where the environment is being protected instead of attacked.
Alan, you speak of, cleanup. Are they doing like remediation in any of these areas, such as like a Superfund site?
Well, that's an ironic question, Sherry. The super funds have not come to bear to clean up those sites. I live in New York City. There's a tremendous polluted bay, Passaic Bay, where the Diamond Alkali Corporation produced Agent Orange. It's a stone's throw from New York City and is one of the largest so-called Superfund sites in the United States. But there are no super funds forthcoming to clean them up. It's been kind of a shell game, and the corporations sell out to one another and protect themselves from taking responsibility. I think to some extent there are dynamics similar to that going on in Florida and Ohio as well. And I'd be very curious who the participants on our panel this evening might have to say, what they might have to say about those local environments as well. I know in Oregon, while there have been some successful efforts to stop the aerial spraying, cleanup is more or less non-existent. And the herbicide that has been sprayed on these balded mountainsides that are clear cut to harvest Douglas fir, those herbicides wash down into the creeks and along those creeks into reservoirs where people drink the water. Their water supply is being poisoned. They know it. They try to fight it. But so far, they have not been able to rally enough influence to overcome the lobbying and tremendous political control that the corporations exercise over their environment.
Exactly. I'd have to agree. Alan, I thank you very much. And I encourage people to get out there. The People versus Agent Orange is being shown in 5 different Florida theaters, as well as theaters in Ohio. And we'll make sure that we put those links in there. So if you guys haven't seen this documentary, it's something that you really want to get out there and watch. I'd like to interview our next guest. His name is Terry Lodge. And Terry has been a big advocate for the war. Terry, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with Agent Orange, both personal and professional?
Surely, thank you. But first, I'd like to thank Alan for that excellent documentary, telling some very obscure but powerful stories that must be told and must be learned. I'm a big advocate against war. As a matter of fact, Jerry, for many years, I was vehemently opposed to the Vietnam War and was active during my college years against it. My oldest brother, I'm the third of four boys, was a Marine lieutenant who was very badly burned in Vietnam in 1968 and died in 1983 of what his VA physicians agreed was almost undoubtedly an Agent Orange inspired brain tumor. It of course personally affected me, but I was prompted in the early 1970s to investigate a lot of what makes up our war machine, and I found out interesting history of chemical warfare. In addition to what Alan was saying about nerve gas being first used in World War I, this is spring in the Midwest, and those of you who drive through agricultural areas commonly will see canisters, very large 200 to 500 gallon canisters being towed by tractors of anhydrous ammonia, which is a byproduct of some of the nerve gas that was developed technologically in World War I era. Some of the incredibly lethal poisons that were used in the Nazi death camps that were formulated by Bayer and a couple of other German corporations during World War II and the Third Reich were subsequently adapted as pesticides used in Europe and North America and other parts of the world. We have a rich history post 1930s of in the United States of using a great many chemicals that actually had or were developed with a very evil purpose in mind, and in part it's one of the great ironies to me that with the knowledge that we had even by the early 1970s of Agent Orange, how it ended up being used as a civilian, as a business mitigation step. Anyway, that's kind of where I am on things. I would point out that agricultural workers, and in particular farm workers, are routinely victimized by spraying, that it is very difficult when you are looking at circumstances of high volume agriculture and the apparent need for high volume herbicide and pesticide use, that it's very difficult to actually depend on the applicators to self-regulate and use the necessary restraint that is called for. But we are apparently so far considering that to be the price of our complicated food production system. And in the case of Oregon, cheap lumber, cheap building material. So we have to figure out what the value and the price things are. And those are two different concepts.
Terry, I wanted to ask, because you were speaking on the agricultural industry and with your experience with the war veterans, do you notice that you find that the workers and the veterans suffer from some of the same health conditions?
Yes, I can't speak so much. Well, the agricultural workers I know here who have been exposed to pesticides, it wasn't 2,4-D or 2,4,5-T. It's more been organophosphates, which are incredibly lethal, malathion, parathion, several other diazinon, a number of other popular or at least well-known chemicals. For instance, here, there are mosquito spraying districts. Toledo, where I am in Northwest Ohio, is flat, marshy wetland. And there's a great deal of money and time and chemistry spent on just trying to keep down mosquito populations. And that is being done now with glyphosate, and formerly, up until about 4 or 5 years ago, was done with malathion, which is very toxic, carcinogenic, and all that. Has a lot of neurological implications medically. But what I have seen in the war veterans from the Vietnam era that I know is that they certainly do share a great many common maladies Agent Orange has been identified and linked to, of course, birth defects and the genetic things that Alan was talking about. And it's the problem is that it is persistent in the genome, that it can be even generation skipping, where the genetic effects may not occur until grandchildren or great-grandchildren or beyond. And that science is incomplete at this point. But in particular, there are a great many examples of neurological illness that are causing a lot of end-of-life problems for the Vietnam vets that I know here. And as I say, diabetes is another. So the problem with this is that for Vietnam and for Oregon and other places where the spraying has occurred, the long-lasting effects are extremely long-lasting. Agent Orange deteriorates when it is exposed or in surface layers of soil and under sunlight, but it tends to repose in river muck, in river bottom and subsoil areas where it changes very, very little and can be an extremely long-lasting molecule. Going to persist in the environment for generations, and I'm talking in terms of what I suspect will be hundreds of years, and that when there is turbulence or changes in water flow in estuaries and in creeks and rivers in mountainous areas, such as Oregon, you're looking at things that in the future will be hotspots, and perhaps nobody will think or work back logically to the Agent Orange possibility as the explanation for an outbreak or a sudden occurrence over a year or two's time of lots of neuro and cancer illnesses.
Exactly. And at my age, I'm in my 50s, and, when they were spraying it back in that day, they never thought about what it would do to the people 50 years later. I would like to introduce Scott Wilson, Pastor Scott Wilson.
Hello, Sherry. I can hear you now.
Awesome. Scott, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Scott,
I really appreciate this opportunity to get the word out about what's happening in Florida. I'm very grateful. So thank everyone.
I'm really excited to have you guys on because I've followed you very, very closely since all of this started, and, trying to pinpoint one thing, or it wasn't. And, watching you post all of the pictures of the fish and stuff like that, it was fascinating to see the correlation just in the many diseases in the things that you were posting, to where you could actually look at like the fish's endocrine system. That was just what blew me away. But I did have a few questions that I prepared for you, and I just want to, because you know so much about the different lakes and the waterways. Can you tell us a little bit about the lakes and waterways and how they've been affected by the chemical spraying in Florida?
Well, I first saw chemical spraying on Lake Kissimmee when I think I was 6 years old. It's always disturbed me. I'm 59 now, so this has been going on in Florida for 55 years. There's been massive amounts of different kinds of combination of herbicides that have been applied to Florida. It's had a huge adverse effect on the lower food chain on the lakes that I spend a lot of time on annually. 8th grade science taught me to, if a system was out of balance, look to the frogs. Well, the frogs are gone. The grass shrimp are gone. The shiners, the shad. The lower part of the food chain has been severely affected. And then last year, Lake Kissimmee, we had the massive turtle die-off that very few people knew about. And all this material the spraying over the years has decomposed so much material that almost every lake in Florida now has at least a 3-foot deep decomposing muck layer that turned every lake in Florida into an underwater compost pile. combined with these herbicides that were added and bond to muddy waters to even further, intensify the situation.
How much chemical does it take to affect the aquatic life?
That's an absolute unknown. No testing that I've done, a lot of cross-reference back to UF IFAS and FWC and textbooks from UF IFAS and even the textbook from IFAS says that long-term cumulative and chronic toxicity of these chemicals, even the active ingredients, is unknown. But the worst part is half of this material is trade secret surfactants and adjuvants, and we don't have any idea what's in them. And the truth is, for 50 years, they don't know what kind of chemical reactions or what kind of adverse effects long-term this is going to have.
Scott, do you know about how many gallons of poisonous chemicals are actually legally released each year?
Well, yeah, I mean, the only annual reports that you can get that are accurate come from the FWC. The annual average over the past 5 years from FWC is about 800,000 gallons a year. But you also have to take into effect in Florida that it's not, FWC is just a small portion. We have the United States Army Corps of Engineers that applies herbicides, the South Florida Water Management District, the Southwest Florida Water Management District, St. Johns River, the another water management district, individual counties. We have upland plant management, U.S. forestry. We got municipalities, every golf course, HOA, managed lakes, that they all get sprayed daily. And then you have the entirety of the Florida agricultural industry, plus practically every homeowner in this state now goes to Home Depot and has a jug of Roundup in their, in their garage on the shelf. So if somebody could come up with a final tally, it would be so astronomical that it'd be heart-stopping. It'd be heart-stopping for people if they knew the truth.
Yeah. I noticed that they give us an acceptable level of these chemicals that are in our waterways. Who decides what that level of toxicity is?
The Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the Florida Department of Agriculture.
Yeah. And that's, that leaves us, back to the regulatory system once again. Scott, I appreciate you taking the time to come on, and I'm sure we'll.
Can I make one other quick statement?
You sure can.
All right. The big problem I believe in Florida happened in 1999. The fisheries management in Florida was two separate entities. There were the Florida Marine Patrol and the Florida Freshwater Fish and Game Commission. When they merged in 1999, there was an additional language written into their charter that gave the FWC constitutional rule authority, not statutory rule authority, which means a law like the Aquatic Weed Control Act falls under this constitutional rule authority, which basically means, number one, that the governor in his power does not have power by executive order to strike down a constitutional law. That can only, but the problem is this was done without Florida due process. In other words, any Florida constitutional law, should have been voted on correctly by we the people for the people in a constitutional amendment. It was not. They gave themselves blanket authority, and unfortunately they answer to no one. And that's their excuse for continuing to use massive amounts of herbicides, is they're required by law to do it. Now, Mike has talked to at least a half a dozen. I have talked to at least a half a dozen attorneys in the last 3 years. They get fired up for about 3 days. They're fired up and want to be on the case until they figure out that it's a Florida constitutional battle, and then they run for the hills. So anybody listening we are in a absolute legal nightmare, and anybody that can help us would be greatly appreciated.
Regulatory system, that's one of the things that I noticed with all of the issues that we have. I mean, it always goes back to the regulatory system. I wanted to introduce Mike Knepper. Mike Knepper has been our drone video that's been out there exposing all of the environmentalist impacts that we've been having to the great degree. And if not for Mike, I don't think that we would have had all of the information that we do have. So Mike, I do appreciate you being with us this evening.
Well, Sherry, I really appreciate it. I've followed you too, so I know that you're on the front lines as well as we are. So I appreciate everybody on this panel. And you know, I do want to start. This is very, very near and dear to me because I do have a personal friend that is dying from Agent Orange. He was in the war, and he's 74, I think now, and he has a few months left to live. So anyway, I'll start by introducing myself. I am just a general contractor, just a normal guy, and you know, several years ago, we were just introduced to somebody that showed us what the spraying was, and it just didn't make any sense to me. So why would you kill a plant in a lake? You know, that's you know, we have too many nutrients, and the plants take the nutrients out. So that and it started me down this path of I do have a drone and I do like to use it. So I just started doing an investigation, and I got to tell you, what I found was just incredible. I mean, I find stuff every day. The last video that I just posted a couple days ago was about, you know, four of the members of the FWC sit on a chemical lobbying group here in Florida, one of the most powerful one. It's the Florida Aquatic Plant Management Society. It's made up of all chemical company employees that make this, and they're not shy about what they are. They say right on their front website what they are. They're there to, and they claim that they are there to assist government agencies. Well, you know, that's lobby. I'm sorry, you can, but you know, to have, you know, people that's working for our government, that's being paid by our tax dollars, sitting on a chemical, you know, lobbying group, you know, it's just a huge conflict of interest. So, you know, we're up against the Goliath, you know, we're David, and we're up against Goliath. You know, these institutions that, you know, the IFAS is funded by chemical companies. They get a third of their budget from chemical companies, and they're the scientists that the FWC uses, you know, to, you know, for all the science that they need about the spray. Well, you know, of course, they're not going to, you know, say anything bad about their boss's chemicals. So anyway, I just you know, the FWC is the main, you know, agency in Florida that is spraying the public lakes. They're, you know, we have them, and they're the ones that are in charge. They don't do any of the spraying themselves. They hire it out to contractors. So, but they are the ones that fund it, and they fund. There's several counties that have their own spray boats, but it's all funded by the FWC. And where they get their money is from Army Corps of Engineers, the South Florida Water Management District. So they get their money from a lot of different sources, but they're the ones that, you know, are, you know, supposed to, you know, they're the ones that tell everybody or tell the contractors what to spray and where to spray. So, but yeah.
Mike, what are they spraying?
Well, diquat is a big one in the fall. Okay, and in my video, in the fall is made by a company, Syngenta. Okay, and everybody's probably heard of Syngenta. But Syngenta is owned by ChemChina, which is the largest agrochemical company in the world, and that company supplies, you know, most of the chemicals in this state. So that's the shocking thing is it's like, you know, we've got the Department of Defense saying that they're a national security they're a danger, and yet we're buying their chemicals and dumping them in our lakes. That shouldn't make sense to anybody.
It doesn't. I'm glad you touched on that, because that was one of the shockers. I mean, it shouldn't be a shocker to me, but after watching your video the other day, it was jaw dropping. I mean, I always knew that, it was our regulatory system that we were fighting, but I didn't realize, I guess, the degree of the battle that we had. So we're going to make sure that we include that link, Mike. And I do appreciate you bringing that forward. And I giving my heartfelt condolences for your friend. It's hard when we have people that, are experiencing those kind of illnesses because of something that our government has sprayed or allows us to spray. I know that in the state of Florida, they've talked about mechanical harvesting. Do you see that that's something that would be more beneficial than the spraying?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody can disagree. The problem is that the FWC, they keep saying, oh, we can't do it because it costs too much. But they cook the books, okay? They don't tell you the whole story. Mechanical harvesting does cost a little bit more than spraying, but when you do it right, it lasts. It takes the plants out of the whole system. Okay, instead of just spraying them, because I got to tell you, we've been following the spray boats and everything else, and they can spray a section, and then 2 months later, it's right back to where it was. I mean, sometimes they spray too much and it just completely annihilates this thing, but most of the time, the plants just grow right back. And it's not the native plants that grow back, because the native plants, Mother Nature is always right. We're never, humans are never wrong or never right. Mother Nature is always right. And there's one reason why we have these invasive plants in our lakes and stuff, is because they're better at taking the nutrients out. It's a proven fact that the water hyacinth and hydrilla, one of the two biggest plants that they go after, take out far more nutrients than our native plants. They're also a hardier plant. They can withstand. So when you spray them, when they spray the shoreline, they spray everything. They can't just spray one plant. It goes over everything. So it kills the native plants. And then we've documented it so many times that you go back to the same area and it's all the invasive plants that's popped right back up again. I mean, sometimes they're green just a week later after they've sprayed it. And all of the cattails and the bulrushes, the video that we did on north part of Lake Okeechobee, where they just sprayed the bulrushes, which is a very important native plant. They just sprayed it. There was a bunch of water hyacinths and water lettuce that was mixed into them. And you could just see in the video, all the bulrushes were dead. All the bulrushes was just washing into the shorelines and everything else. And the invasive plant, the water lettuce and the water hyacinths, were already starting to come back, already starting to turn green again. So they annihilated a really important plant, all in the name of trying to get these few invasives. And it's just not working. It's so frustrating. I mean, you can tell in my voice, but it's so frustrating that they can't see it. And they can't see it because they're so corrupt that they can't, see it, because they're so corrupt that they're so, buddy with the chemical companies, and they just, they just believe them when the chemical company says, oh no, it's good.
Right. Mike, what you're talking about is a corporate-owned, corporate-dominated system of really weak regulation where you end up chasing your tail.
Yeah.
I think we need to talk about how community rights and rights of nature and taking back the power and exerting local control fits in here.
I agree. In the chat, you'll see a couple of postings from the Oregon Community Rights Movement, where in Lincoln County, Oregon, they had a ballot initiative to ban aerial spraying of the herbicides. It was a very hard fought electoral battle. I believe the people won by only about 65 votes. They were outspent about 20-1 because there was some powerful money that chimed in to protect the chemical industry and the timber industry. But they won that and secured a ban against the aerial spraying of herbicides. But after, I think it's 26 or 27 months, the judge who received the appeal from the powers that be had to rule in favor of overturning the ban because the state had preemptive rights over the local communities, and the state, which is far more susceptible to the lobbying efforts of big money, has vested in it the right to control such environmental laws. Our main character in the documentary, The People versus Agent Orange, one of the two main characters, Carol Van Strum, says we have the right to protect ourselves from being poisoned. And we took that line and actually put it on the poster of the film. But truth be told, the people don't have that right, because that right is being preempted by big money. And if we don't rearrange the whole civic policy making influence in this country, we will be beholden to big money, and it will poison us until we're all gone.
Right. And thank you, Alan. I understand Barbara Davis and Carol Fant are both on this call. I think, Barbara, would you like to follow up a little bit on what Alan was saying about the court battle in Lincoln County?
Sure, thank you. It lasted for 29 months. And again, as Alan said, it was based on state preemption over pesticides. And that's basically what kills everything, is state preemption. That's the hammer, that's the vehicle that the corporate state likes to use to suppress the vote of the people.
So
We're very familiar with that in Florida, preemption.
And what kinds of organizing, how did you get drawn into this, and how did you get involved, Barbara?
Personally, myself, I'd actually read about community rights a couple years before, and I thought, wow, what a great idea. Having perceived some injustice in another state in which I lived, met up with some people, even after living here in Oregon for 10 years. I lived here for 10 years before I found out about aerial spraying of pesticides. That's how well they keep it hidden. And that's when I learned about aerial spraying of pesticides. And I said, well, whatever it is, whatever you're doing, let me help, because I can't walk away from this. This is crazy.
Barbara, were there a lot of people that were in your group that were
involved?
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people think that, it takes.
No. The core group was probably 5 or 6 of us, and we worked pretty hard on that. And we did a lot of grassroots organizing and education via social media, and just plain old door knocking and having educational events throughout the county. But once the community saw that we were serious and that we actually were on the ballot, then more people, with a lot of begging and pleading and bribing, more citizens got wind of what's going on and started helping us knock on doors, pass out flyers, and basic grassroots stuff.
Thank you, Barbara. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Terry, where do we go from here? We know what our issues are in Florida. What would you recommend to the people of Florida so that they could follow suit like the people in Oregon?
Well, the litigation is not a silver bullet. It's not even a very rewarding avenue. The value that I've seen in the Lake Erie Bill of Rights fight here in Northern Ohio has been that it has changed the direction of a lot of the discussion. It of course has involved an awful lot of grassroots organizing and people, pounding the pavement, literally gathering signatures to put something on the ballot. But you're talking, what I'm hearing, and this story, and I'm not diminishing what Scott and Mike have been saying, and Alan too, but this is a typical, hellaciously typical story, and that you end up with weak regulation and a situation where we talk about how the system is broken when, as some of us frequently remind the others of us, it's working just fine for people who need and want to make money from it. So what you're talking about is grassroots effort. Litigation can help highlight and dramatize an issue, but really we're talking about a governmental apparatuses that don't work, don't respond, aren't stacked in favor of the public interest much, if at all, and in fact often are for all of the literature and the shiny folders and pamphlets that they publish aren't there really to help do anything to improve the environmental lot for the public and for nature. So what we're talking about, I think, is the need for organizing that sends a really powerful message, as we did, as you have done to some extent in Florida, as we have done to some extent in Ohio and in Oregon. People are saying this is enough. This is where we draw the line, and as you can tell from the documentary, people are making enormous sacrifices, sometimes involving life and death. But I think we're at that place in human history and in the sad state of the environment. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of a lot of the environmental laws that were passed and hailed as such enormously progressive changes in 1969, 70, 71, 2, in that stretch of time. And, 3 generations on, I'm having very little hope for the efficacy of the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And it is a matter of people having to find some way to slam on the brakes and take back control. And the direct democracy avenues, alternatives that we have are pretty nearly all we have left until it gets down to civil disobedience. I don't know. People have to fight back, and they will, but it would be better if we could do it in some fashion as organizations.
Thank you. I know that, in Florida, there are various water groups, and I know that everybody is working on different issues. And that was one of the things that pulled me towards working with CELDIF, because they do work on so many issues. It's not just the spraying or the mosquitoes or the cyanobacteria. It made me realize that it was the regulatory state that we were actually up against, because that's who was doing it.
Yeah. What I think is important to understand is that you can't, except in very rare circumstances, you can't turn to elected officials and count on them to really stick with things or even take notice of the points that you're trying to make. Sometimes they are certainly bought. Sometimes they are simply completely uninformed. But we spend an awful lot of time trying to load up people that we think are the decision makers without realizing that sometimes the only thing that they understand is when people take off on their own direction and make it really clear that we're going to legislate, we're going to pass the laws, we're going to exert something by way of control over what's going on. And even if the result is flatly saying no to spraying, no to pollution, and they tell us it's not realistic, and we've got state laws and federal laws and all kinds of regs and stuff, and you can't just turn your back on them. Well, they're not serving us well at all. That's where state constitutional rights come into play.
Yeah, I know that, attacking this at the local level is where it all needs to start. But, how does one take it from the local level to that state level?
That's where you end up having to go to meetings. You end up having to create and produce events that draw attention in the media. I'm looking in chat, and with Florida growing at 1,000 people a day, how do we get many of these new residents to turn off their blinders to living in paradise with green golf courses and wake up to the brutal realities? That's the question. That's the question that has to be answered. And Barbara points out correctly, local personal stories of harm are what often wakes people up. Anecdotes, true stories from people who are living it and who are standing alongside you and trying to tell you, join up. Those are the things those are the weapons we have.
Harry,
Yeah.
things have advanced, I think, in Oregon to the point where this dynamic of preemption is being challenged again on the state level. And as I somewhat glibly put it, they're trying to preempt preemption. I'm wondering if Barbara can describe the latest round in that effort to regain control over the environment there. Barbara, are you there, and can you help us with that?
I'm here, Alan. Thank you. On the local level, our own measure that was overturned, we are appealing that in the state appeals court, and oral arguments will be heard sometime after April. But we don't hold out. I mean, at the same time, we're also working at the state level. We've got a right to local decision-making ballot or measure that we are trying to get through the legislature, those legislators that most often don't listen to us and don't have our best interests at heart, but we are trying every way we can, both at the state level and the local level, to establish local decision-making. So that's where we are.
As a movement.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
Are there any final thoughts from anyone before we close up? We have a few minutes. Any questions that you guys might have for each other? I know that we will be doing a weekly call, so check our group page so that we can continue this conversation. I know that there were a lot of questions that are out there that everybody has that we're all looking for answers to. And I think by us getting together like this more often, it brings us to the resolution I think that we all need. Are there any questions that you guys might have for each other?
I don't have a question, but I just want to make one more statement. We're fighting for all the critters that live in these lakes. We've documented how they're all being died or being killed by this spraying. And, yes, people are being affected, but the lakes are being absolutely destroyed by this spraying. And, people have got to stop with this. Humans have this entitlement where they think that they own, just because they live on a lake, and they want to see their green grass go right down to the water's edge and not see any, plants or anything. We've got to change that. A healthy lake has emergent plants all around it. And you look at every golf course, every community pond and stuff, it's absolutely green right to the water's edge because they come and they spray every month. They'll spray. I lived in a development, and we saw the little boat there 4 or 5 times a year. You would see them, and they're just spraying it, and they spray them, kill the plants, and then that causes algae. We just got to get this mentality that humans have, that they own the water, and that they, you know, these lakes are owned by the critters that live in them. And we don't have the right to go kill them any more than somebody has the right to burn our house down and plant trees in it because they don't like the looks of our tree. So.
Right. Yes.
Exactly. Just like Tish says, righteous nature is the
Yes.
strategy
Yes,
to protect
absolutely.
the critters.
Yeah.
I do appreciate everybody joining. It's almost 8 o'clock. And like I said, I want to continue this conversation. So please check back on our Clean Water Now page, and we will make sure that we will create links to everything that we went through here today. And we definitely want to stay up on this. And if you haven't seen the film, The People versus Agent Orange, get out there and see it, folks, because it's an eye opener. We may not be spraying Agent Orange here in the States anymore or anywhere, but the plethora of rainbow chemicals, they're out there, and that's what they're still using today. And we need to stand together and just say no and stop it. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys joining us this evening, and I thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank the rest of you.
Blessings to all. Thank you very much.